jump in with on how these two things fit together. If we're talking about free education, we're talking about basically subsidized. Somebody's taking the tax money and then sending it back through. We're also talking about accountability and quality of education, and we're talking about scope creep on the cost. Well, the insurance and the medical industry is part of why we're getting that. Is we have the books that happen in the hospital. The hospital makes up their price books. The price books are designed for the insurance companies. They're designed with an inflated cost so that the insurance companies can feel good about negotiating them down. Whereas the normal person on the street, they try to apply this book to them. You can't possibly pay that. So the normal person on the street can't comparison shop, can't price shop. And every different hospital is a different book. So we have a similar problem in the educational sphere. Whereas if we bring in kind of education insurance, which is sort of what funding the educational system for everyone for free would be, how do we keep up it? How do we keep accountability? How do we track value? What is the value of an education? How do we track what the value is? What happens to people's ability to make good decisions about where they're going and who's stewarding more money in their space as well?
I can tackle part of that. So one thing that I discovered, I want to say about 5 years ago, is there was an online tool developed by a famous physicist named Brian Greene. He's done a lot of books, and he based this website and this school concept around his World Science Festival that he would put on. So he called it World Science U, and he did it as a way to help improve education across the board for high school and college. And you can actually get a certification if you go through and do the math. And the way he tackled it is he utilized all the technological breakthroughs in education that have happened. It wasn't just a let's do this lecture, let's read this book, let's do these notes, let's do this walkthrough. It wasn't a one attack. So there was a lecture component, there was interactive components, and it was all done online, and he offers it to the world for free. And he has the top minds around the country and around the world giving these courses. He's done a few himself. You can do the certificate programs, or you could do the full programs. And he does this for free for everybody without any government backing, just with a little bit of support from the scientific community. And it's amazing. I've done some of the courses. I enjoy physics. I'm a nerd. And it's just one of those things that if we expand that concept and build with all that we know about learning, we can improve learning quite a bit. The biggest mistake we've made as a country, and quite often around the world, is that we've homogenized and we've made one way of doing education for everybody. People don't learn the same way. I'm severely dyslexic. School in the English world was a nightmare. I love reading. I love literature. But I didn't know that growing up because I would look at a page and it would be gobbledygook. I always thought that was my fault because the education wasn't tailored to my needs. I've now surpassed that. I've gone much further. And if we tailored our education around that, identifying what people's needs are and using technology to focus in on what we have. We live in a golden age of technology and innovation. A little bit of investment could go a long way, and we can give equal education to everybody. It's not just about filling this classroom with the best teachers in this district. It's about giving everybody access to the best education everywhere. So,
yeah, from my perspective, it seems like we really need to harken back to what is the goal of public school. When public school was first instituted, I feel like the overarching goal was 1, daycare, and 2, to prepare them for life afterwards. Generally, that was a factory job. So what did you have? You had a lot of locked classes. Okay, you go from here to here to here, and then you have a lunch break, here to here to here, and then the bell rings, and then you're gone. Okay, now when you get into work, same thing. You do your job for a little while, you get a break, you do your job for a little while, you get lunch, you job for a little while, take a break, you do your job for a little while, bell rings, go home. And now it's gotten to that point where school is no longer, and hasn't for some decades, been preparing any young person for life afterwards. once you leave high school, do you feel prepared for what the world has for you? And I don't feel like that's something that I was prepared for. Going through the school system, it was, here's your math, here's your English, here's your history, here's your biology, off you go. And once you take that first step out and you try to get a job, nobody needs biology, nobody needs your history, nobody needs any of these other skills that you were taught. We just need you to do this. And I feel like education, while those things are extremely important, knowing history, knowing biology, knowing math, yes, you do need them, but it's important to realize how they're going to be applied afterwards. If you spend your entire life up until high school only doing math and then realize, oh, well, these are all the jobs I can do with math, and I don't want to be of them, and for some reason I can't make any money with them, well, congratulations. The entire, 12, 15 years that you spent in the education system before then, completely worthless. You were doing nothing more than wasting your time. I feel like there needs to be far more, not necessarily conversation, but just getting students interested in what they want to do. And if they're interested in something, they will naturally learn. They will naturally pick up on these things. And if they need help, they will seek it out. I've been in classrooms where I'll be sitting with somebody and they'll be reading a book and they'll go to the teacher, how do I say this word? How do I do this? And that kind of learning is something that is still desperately needed, but it just seems to be getting beaten out of kids by the time they're in high school. Well, I don't want to learn about this anymore. No, I can't do that. And it's not, well, what are you interested in? Do you like history? Is that something that you could foresee yourself doing something later on, teaching other people about history? Could you use that to be an archaeologist? Well, as it turns out, I'm really not interested in history. I'd rather do biology. I can do something with biology. I want to create vaccines. That's something that I think we need to harken back to. What is the goal of public education?
I mean, I think to deal with things like calculating what the real value is in your education, how do you know, right? That's the big question, especially when you go to college. It's how do I know that I'm getting my bang for my buck in my education? We use a couple figures now. We compare things like salary and employment opportunities and things like that, but there's a lot more to it than that. So I have a degree in classical studies, which is Greek and Roman history and Latin and things like that. I did not realize how valuable not just the knowledge I have, but the skills that it gave to me would be. People don't really know how to research. They kind of on the surface, like prima facie, they kind of understand what research is, but truly sitting and doing research and doing research papers, a lot of people actually don't have that skill. So my value for my education didn't necessarily come from the material I was learning, but from how I was learning it, how I was utilizing it. And I think that's one thing that we also need to make sure kids understand. When you go to college and you're majoring in philosophy, you're not just majoring in sitting around talking about Aristotle. You're majoring in how to debate, how to argue, how to criticize, how to open a discussion, how to have uncomfortable talks. You're learning a lot. I'm very biased towards philosophy because my husband majored in it, has a degree in it. But it's the life skills it gives you are astronomically more important than something. It prepares you better for business than an MBA does. Which a lot of people don't think about, because you hear politicians like Marco Rubio saying we don't need more welders, less philosophers. He's wrong. What we need are welders who know philosophy. That's what we need. And we need to make sure that we're framing education and talking about education in more than just dollars and cents and salaries and employment numbers. It's in skill development. What can you put on your resume with this degree? What can you bring to the table with this degree after you get it? One of the first and foremost ways we can deal with that is start out by getting a competent Secretary of Education who can do things like that and who's willing to pursue opportunities like that and make that a blanket requirement for schools. Don't just talk about the material. Every course must talk about a skill that you'll develop as well as material you're going to learn. I think something like that can actually help kids understand, oh, if I take, the history of Greek warfare, I'm not just going to learn about how they used to set up for battle and go to battle. I'm going to learn how to analyze patterns. I'm going to learn how to talk about certain pieces of information. I'm going to have the skill to go to the library and differentiate and talk about resources and things like that. Tell people what skills they're going to get out of their class. Right now, we pay a hell of a lot of money to go to college. And we need to make sure that we're not just focusing on what information am I going to graduate with, it's what abilities am I going to graduate with. So I think that's one of the first conversations we need to have as far as education goes and what our bang for our buck is. But it's easy to talk about K through 12 and think about it because there are a ton of changes that need to happen in K through 12. Let's elect more teachers to Congress because we are never going to change the education system unless we have people from the education system trying to change it because they know what's wrong with it. I remember the outreach over Common Core, and I had friends of mine with kids who were talking about, oh, Common Core is the worst. I'm not a teacher. You send your kids off to school from 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. You don't teach them. That teacher teaches them. And if that teacher looks at me and says, this is actually the best way for your kid to learn math, I don't know how to teach my kid math. This teacher knows how to teach my kid math. If they tell me this is the right way and my kid is learning it and flourishing, I trust you. You have to have trust with your teachers. They're educators because they want to educate your children. They're educators because they want to make their lives better. They're not trying to make it worse for them or harder for them or be bad teachers. They are not, it's not a glamorous position. You don't make millions being a public education teacher. That's not your rags to riches story. But they're doing it because they love what they do. And I think having teachers elected into Congress and having teachers working in education, having people that may or may not actually have experience in the education world as the Secretary of Education is extremely important because that experience and that knowledge and that love for what they do, that's what's going to help us reform our education system more than politicians ever will.
This is where you and I and everyone else are going to get into frustration. We think that the system should function. We know that there's a structure to it, that there's an input, a process, and an output. And I think this is one of the things that dissuades a lot of voters is they see that a process should work like we all do, and it doesn't, so they give up. Whereas we're all fighting to try and make that process, that structure that should work again. On to the previous discussion we were just talking about, I'm going to start with college. It's interesting to me how many job applications say must have a college degree, but then don't say what in. So for example, if you have a job application that says must have a college degree and you must have a working knowledge of history, you must have a working knowledge of chemistry, biochemistry, physics, math, literature, this means you actually have to have that training, that background knowledge, as well as the process. The majority of jobs that say must have college degree is just a way for the employer to force the average applicant to be about 4 years older. It's just a way to have the employer be too lazy to screen, is this person actually going to show up on Monday? Because they've proven they can show up at least enough to get a degree. And it also means that that applicant probably has so much debt that the first day that job sucks. The first day that job's description doesn't even come close to reflecting the torture that they're going through. They can't quit because they've got a giant student debt. Down to K to 12, our current Secretary of Education, which she doesn't even deserve the title. It's a partisan hackery that she was ever even put into that office. I can go off on Trump's cabinet, and I'll give you the easiest litmus test ever. If you take any member of Trump's cabinet and shuffle them into another position, is that position any worse off than it was with the other person? And the answer is no, they're all equally unqualified, which I think is proof that that's a terrible thing. But moving on, K through 12. We cannot let schools be run like a business. We cannot let schools become private funded. The whole voucher system is sold as a way to help improve education, to help customize education. In practice, it's a way to help rich people extract their tax money back out of the public school system and force their children into maybe a great technical school, but more likely an indoctrination camp that has more in common with a Islamic extremist madras than it has with actually preparing them for the modern world. So the way we deal with K through 12, one of the things that I think we should absolutely do is state schools should give public school students preference until we fix public tuition for everyone. Until we fix that, in-state tuition should apply for people who went to in-state public schools. Grades inflated by private schools should not compete with grades that a child earned in a classroom that, because of underfunding, had 40 students per teacher, as opposed to because of great funding had 12 students per teacher at most, plus a couple of aides. So we've gone through the process of politics not working, and we're all going to try and fix that. K through 12, I think the Common Core issue, I've dealt with both sides of that. There are a lot of companies that made a lot of money pushing their structure of Common Core, and I've heard teachers scream up one side and down the other about Common Core because of the structures of the classes they had to teach and because of teaching to the test. I'm a military brat. I was born in Iowa, I lived in Colorado, I lived in Southern California, I lived in Eastern Washington. If it weren't for a common standard of some kind, which thankfully those states roughly had, I would have come from Southern California and landed in Eastern Washington and either been so far behind my classmates as to be lost, or been so far ahead of them to be bored out of my mind. There is a value in the United States to a common standard for public education, because If you're in the military, you move around. If you're in business, how many of us graduated with a degree from one university and then lived in another state? I went to Wisconsin for my PhD. If I'd had kids at the time and I drug them from Washington State to Wisconsin, they damn well better have had a uniform standard, or I would have had to homeschool those children on top of earning a PhD just to keep them at a compatible level. There is a national interest, just like healthcare, in public education. It's an investment in all of us. And I've kind of gone off topic, but I'm listening to all this and trying to bite my tongue and wait my turn. But you guys I love this conversation. I'm looking forward to the point where we have something we disagree on, so we can actually show that we can work through a structure. But for this, thank you.